Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Susan Lopresti Wellness, Mind, Body, and Soul. This is the podcast where we explore the highs, the lows, and everything in between when it comes to a woman's life, her health, and all aspects of navigating the midlife landscape. I'm your host, Susan Lopresti, and today I have a special guest with me. Her name is Dr. Emma Jones. And Dr. Jones is an experienced pediatric hospice and palliative care physician who's deeply committed to helping clinicians navigate the emotional weight of this work. Dr. Jones is the author of The Phoenix Blueprint, Rising Stronger from the Blaze of Healthcare. It's a best-selling book about her personal experience with burnout as well as practical advice for how to recover. She also has an amazing online group coaching program called Unstuck, which addresses burnout not just as an individual problem, but as a natural response to a broken system. It's a space to reimagine your role without losing your soul. Emma offers a perspective that's grounded in real bedside experience and rooted in love-centered, community-minded care. Her recent work explores the rare kind of freedom that hospice can offer within a system that often feels overwhelming. And without further ado, Emma, welcome to my podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Oh, thank you, Susan, for that lovely and thorough introduction. It's so nice to have all of your stuff reflected back to you.
Isn't that wonderful, right? To realize what you've accomplished is beautiful.
It
So
is.
let's start from the very beginning and talk about what led up to your experience with burnout. What was going on?
Yeah, so my experiences as a physician in the modern healthcare system, I particularly have practiced in pediatrics and pediatric oncology and also pediatric palliative care and hospice. So I've taken care of kids at some of the sickest points, some of the most severe illnesses, and then certainly walked with families through their children dying, which I'm sure everyone can imagine is some of the hardest aspects of medical practice. And so my burnout came as a result of both engaging with that work fully without any ways to put myself back together after being so engaged with patients. So, kind of a lack of a self repair system for a really, really long time. And then probably being in some systems that just weren't really aligned with me. I took a job at a very prestigious medical school and children's hospital. And, I think that the pressure that comes with that and the expectations that come with that were a little bit mismatched with the things that were really important to me. So those are kind of the themes. How it looked was me just getting totally fried and yelling at patients and yelling at families and totally withdrawing from my family and kind of shutting down as a person when it really got to the most acute aspect. And those are a lot of the stories that I'm happy to share today. And I do share in the book about how it looked when I was in that severe burnout. But the reasons were really that I was kind of out of alignment with the way that I had to care for myself when I'm doing such hard work, right? The work is great. It's very meaningful and I love doing it, but it does strain you. And so you have to have matching systems to take care of yourself. And then also some values misalignment with the type of work that I was doing, or specifically like where I was doing it in the academic setting and that kind of thing.
And there's this emotional component to it, which is probably enormous because you get attached, especially with children. My God, that's the hardest thing. And dealing with the family grieving and knowing that there's no hope in sight, it's going to end like that. So I'm sure you're not the only doctor out there who has experienced this. This is probably an ongoing thing. And are you also overworked? Was it at a point where you were putting in a lot more hours than you really should be doing where you could disconnect for a while?
Yeah, I think you bring up a couple of really good points. And I think to speak to the specific issue of overwork, because then you also talked about emotional burden. But let's start with the overwork. There's just too much work to do. It's not a human being's worth of effort, hours, time, number of patients you have to care for, number of decisions you have to make. However, you were going to bucket how much work we do, it's just too much. And
Mm.
that definitely is one of the drivers of healthcare burnout, especially when we look at nurses or hospital based people, that there are just too many patients for them to take care of. And so, or there aren't enough nurses, say, on that shift. So, per person, they're having more patients than is safe to take care of. That's a huge driver and very well reflected in the literature and sort of what we know about what's happening in healthcare burnout. So that is part of it. But I think that can't be the whole story. And I know this to be true because we have all been taught through times where we had to see a lot of patients or do a lot of work and we didn't get burned out. Like that's not it. And you can think about yourself, right? There are those times where you were working, working, working. Maybe you're working on a project that you were really energized about or doing some manual thing around the house. You worked on it for a lot of hours, but you
Yeah.
wouldn't say you were burned out by it. You just would maybe you're tired, but there's a difference. So it's something else, right? It's not just the overwork. Overwork alone will eventually burn you out, right? If every single day you get up and run 40 miles, your body can't do that every single day over and over and over again. The simple work will burn you out eventually or just break you down.
Hmm.
But this emotional piece is like a big part of it because the piece that we sort of know, and I think whatever curious to know how you might put this into a metaphor or into a system of thought, but that we sort of waste energy by worry. We waste energy by holding on to sort of energetic things that don't belong to us. And that is a big driver of burnout. And then also kind of having the wrong relationship with your work, like thinking that you're there to do one thing, but you're really doing something else is kind of another driver. And so you mentioned, being emotionally invested with the patients. Of course, we're human beings. That happens. Like we get drawn into the story, we get emotionally invested, but that really we need to learn how to not do that so much, right? Boundary setting, keeping a healthy level of detachment, not in the way that it means like we're robotic, but that if I'm really attached to every single patient that dies, how do I go on? How do I continue? I mean, people who experience a death are bereaved people, and we give bereaved people space to not have to do hard work for some period of time, right? So, how could that possibly be true for me if I'm bereaved like on a daily basis? That can't be true, right? I have to be separate from that. And that's also, I think, a really under-recognized. We have some component. I don't want to overlook the grief that healthcare workers experience because I think that's actually part of it too, that we don't acknowledge that we have human feelings. But we can't also get so sucked in that then we're in that sort of grief period as if we experienced our own loss because we can't function. And somewhere in there, you can tell this is a concept I'm still kind of playing with, but it's all of that. And not knowing how to deal with any of it. We never were taught any of this stuff in medical school or nursing school is
Right.
the biggest issue.
Right. Because I'm thinking, as you're talking about this, is that there has to be some kind of a disconnect, some type of self care for you as the practitioner to let that stress go and either meditate or working out or taking classes, doing something, seeing a therapist, talking it out. If you're just working robotically and not doing anything to bring yourself back to yourself and just connect with you and your feelings, and I guess because you're so busy, you may be thinking, well, we don't have time to do that. But it clearly, is that what led to your burnout? Talk about your burnout. Like, what was the final trigger that woke you up, let's say, to what was really happening?
Yeah, so I think that I tell a story in the book that I think is really helpful to understand, because while one of the things that I really want to do is prevent people from getting to such a crisis moment, a lot of us have crisis moments. Or maybe you can recognize a smaller red flag that's putting its hand up. What happened with me was that I was kind of moving along the steps, right? I'm doing all the things, good girl stuff. I'm moving my way up the academic ladder, working plenty of hours, supervising the trainees, taking good care of the patients, trying to raise two kids at the same time. And my husband is also a physician. So we have a very busy household. But we got this. Like, we are made for busy. We have done 100-hour weeks. This 60-hour week is nothing, like, let's just keep going. Grind, 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 grind. This is the one skill that we know is grind, hustle, grit it out, that kind of stuff. This is very much muscle memory for most physicians from our training. And so you keep doing that, right? I kept doing that for 10 and a half years after I finished medical school before it really kind of came to that crisis point, which was a big wake up call for me when I was so fried, so tired, had been on service for 5 weeks straight, which also involves call every single night, like phone call, not in the hospital, but still, you're interrupted. So sleep deprived, been working, not taking care of myself at all. I mean, you don't exercise, you can only imagine, right?
Right.
So everything the opposite of how we would tell people to take care of themselves, right? Physicians are the worst about actually taking care of ourselves. And then we're in a very stressful family meeting. What I do as a palliative care doctor often is facilitate communication between the families and other teams, and that requires me to be calm, requires me to be actively listening, and requires me to be doing that facilitation and mediation work. Not easy, right? You got to be on your top game. I was not, and really just cracked, and that resulted in me being unprofessional and yelling at people, and kind of, I mean, probably saying things that weren't the worst, but certainly not helpful to the situation. And what I think it really cued was not even that the meeting went that badly, but like, so many people in that meeting were like, wow, she is not herself. Something is wrong. Unfortunately, the response to that, which I think did come from a loving place, was that I got sent home for 6 weeks. So I kind of got put on involuntary leave, which was what I needed. I mean, I've just told this story about how rest and taking care of yourself and taking time for yourself is what you need. But when all of a sudden, the rug gets pulled out from under you and you're told you can't do your beloved profession anymore, that's very disorienting. And it certainly was to me, and cast me into a weeks long period of despondency and depression where I didn't want to get out of bed, didn't want to engage with anyone, didn't want to eat, anything like that. So it's like everything just kind of spiraled down. I mean, I was already burned out, by evidence by the fact that I'm yelling in the middle of a family conference, but then I got even more burned out because my identity was just immediately taken away from me, and I had nothing. I had nothing else. And that scared the bejeebies out of me, that when I didn't have that job, I didn't know who I was. And
Yes.
that was the wake up call.
Wow. Yeah. But in reality, that was the biggest blessing that you could have received, was being sent home that day. And so that's what transpired for you to write this book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think that one of the, you know, we talk a lot about transformational experiences and post traumatic growth. And so, I work with people who have been through all manner of traumatic circumstances, most notably in my world, people who've had a cancer diagnosis or had someone close to them die. Like, that's two of the most transformative experiences, or they themselves near death experience. And so we see stories every day of people who've been through that and then said, oh, like, this thing made me look around and reevaluate.
Yes.
And so I think that certainly was one of those transformative experiences for me. There were very specific things that sort of came out of it that have been transformational in my life. I mean, just the slowing down and getting into bed was absolutely what I needed. It felt so weird and I resisted it, but that the rest, and probably a lot more than I would have thought, right? I'm saying I was despondent, but I mean, I think really I was just needing rest. I mean, maybe sleeping for 18 hours a day was what my body actually needed at that time. The other thing that happened is I started practicing yoga out of spite. I kind of had this, thought to myself, like, well, now I'm home all day. What am I supposed to do? Go to yoga? Like some kind of stay at home mom? I was so, so unhappy about it. Like, I did not go willingly. And yet it did its thing. And so yoga has become kind of an integrated part of my recovery and part of the tradition that I teach from. I think yoga has a really divisive sort of relationship with medicine and with burnout. And a lot of people hate it when you talk about yoga. I think a lot of people had the same opinion I had, like, why would I ever do that? Right. And yet it was one of the most helpful and transformative things, was showing up on that mat and meeting some of the teachers that I met who I continue to work with now. And then, yeah, so then but what I didn't have was a guide. What I didn't have was somebody who had been in that place and gotten themselves out and knew the way to get out. And so then that's what I became, right? They always say, read the book you wish you had to read, or make the program that you wish you could take, or whatever. And that's sort of what I did. And that has been part of my healing in and of itself. That through the story is that, through going through this, my story, through going through this experience now allows me to be able to teach people so that I can be the guide for somebody who find themselves in that situation.
So, besides yoga, what other tools or self care rituals are you doing that has helped as well? What's changed from before to now besides yoga? Because yoga is huge. I'm a big believer in yoga and the benefits of it.
Yes. Thank you for that lovely question. And I'm sure we could talk for hours about rituals and practices and things that are helpful. Rest itself, just sort of doing a like bedtime and prioritizing sleep is actually really huge. Naming to myself, my sleep is so important. My sleep is the foundation of how I am a good person, doctor, mom, fill in whatever comes at the rest of that sentence,
Yes.
was transformative, because I was raised in a tradition where like sleep was unnecessary. Sleep in 20-minute increments was perfectly fine. So I cannot underestimate how transformative this was, that I now believe that sleep is important.
Yes.
So that's a big one. We have a pretty regular bedtime in our house for everybody in the house. Started when my kids were young, but now that they're teenagers, we still kind of think about bedtime. My husband goes to bed early because he gets up early. So that's helpful too, right? There was a lot around like life that actually had to be sorted
Yes.
to get to where we could actually get good sleep. So that's really a big one. I've really gotten interested lately in the downsides of technology and kind of really investigating how much is my phone interfering with my mind, other ways. I mean, right now I'm sitting at a desk where I have two laptops and another monitor, and I'm talking to you on my phone. Like, just the amount of like electronic information around me is a little bit overwhelming.
Yes.
And so just sort of being thoughtful about that is kind of the stage that I'm at. I did recently read this book called How to Break Up with Your Phone that sort of takes you through this. I've gotten an old school alarm clock so that my phone doesn't have to be at my bedside anymore.
That's a great tip. That's a great tip.
Those, yeah. I mean, I think all these things we don't, once you start paying attention, you will easily find so many things in your life that could be simple changes that could have huge impacts. And then everything kind of weaves in together, right? You can already tell out of the two things I'm talking about, the sleep and the technology, that those two work together. You decrease your reliance on technology, you're probably going to sleep better.
Absolutely. Yes.
Exercise is huge. I mean, we have really good neuroscience evidence that that is the number one thing that protects our brains from decline, protects us from dementia, helps us stay sharp in the moment, increases neuroplasticity, makes us more adaptable. Move your bodies. So that this one actually took me a lot. Like, this was a journey. In the time that I did that I had the episode of that huge burnout, I did not exercise at all. And I walked like from the train station to the hospital. That was like my extent of my exercise per day, which I guess is better than nothing. And I disdained exercise. Like I hated it. And I could not assign, like in my mind, I could cognitively, right? But like in my mind and in my body, could not believe that exercise was actually good for you.
Yeah.
So making that shift gradually over time, and that's again a whole story for another day about how I reprogrammed that, but to the point where now I really enjoy exercise. I easily believe it easily. It is absolutely true that I feel more energetic and I feel better if I exercise. Like that is the way to feel more energetic.
Yes.
And that's absolutely essential and as a foundational thing. So that's been kind of a big one that if we track back to, what happened during those 6 weeks that I was home, well, I did go to yoga. A lot of the days I literally just laid on the mat because I was so depleted. I couldn't even do the most simplest pose. I just laid on the mat face down, what's called crocodile pose, for the entire 50 minutes and cried most of the time. But that built some kind of habit pattern where I go to that studio and I get on that mat. And then like one day I could actually stand up and do a pose. And then the next day and the next day and the next day. And now I can do pretty much most of the most challenging poses or the things that require strength, right? So whatever exercise you would want to do, you would just do the same thing, right? Start doing some version of it
Right. Yeah.
until it kind of repatterns and reprograms, because that one's a big one. And then boundaries, the boundaries is also a really huge transformation for me. I don't know that in my former life, we'll call it pre-breakdown life, I even knew the word boundaries. Like I don't think I maybe never even heard of it. And now I have so many clear boundaries. I can obviously tell you different ways to think about boundaries and different types of boundaries and all of those types of things. But the most simplest way that I think about boundaries is where do I stop and you start? So, like, what's my stuff and what's your stuff and, what's God's stuff is the most important, simplest way to think about boundaries. Because then that also will help you sort your time properly and, sort your all of it any way you want to think about boundaries. And that when when we talked about sort of that emotional involvement with the patients, that's an evidence of not having a boundary, right? We're too far into their stuff. We need to really say, oh, my stuff's over here. And some of it, like some of the grief and some of the emotional attachment is my stuff. Like I'm staying in my boundaries and it still hurts because that's a
Yes.
cute little person that I got to know for the past 5 years.
Yes.
Like, of course, even as a clinician, I have some kind of relationship with that person that I experience a loss, but not the same. I don't have to feel the feelings as if that was my own child. That's where we need a good boundary.
Yes. I think as women, we have a hard time setting boundaries because we're people pleasers and we want to always do
Right.
the right thing. And yeah, so that's a difficult one. That really is.
It it is. It is. And I think that I have come to understand it and teach it now by the here's what happens if you don't, right? I think that it's so easy to see what happens when you do set a boundary, and sometimes there's a negative consequence. And we've experienced that over our lives, right? We set a boundary and someone turns away from us for
Yes.
some reason. And so then we solve that problem by just stop setting boundaries, which was not the right solution.
No.
But that is the pattern that we all developed, of course.
Right.
And,
Right.
and so I often tell from the medical perspective stories and have some in the book as well, but that I think it's easy to kind of extrapolate some other version of this of like, oh, here's what happens if you're too enmeshed with your patients or you don't have boundaries and a negative consequence that comes from that, because it is harder to see. And it doesn't happen in every case. And often it's not immediate. It's like down the road. I tell a story about myself. This is my story. I share other people's stories with permission, but this one's mine. That, I was so enmeshed with this family. I was the only person that they would talk to. They didn't want to see one of my partners. They didn't want, because I'm the best doctor, right? I was really patting my ego with this we must have Dr. Jones thing. And that's great. They feel like they've got a doctor that's a personal touch. I feel like my patient loves me and I'm being a good doctor, because being a good doctor means constantly being available. That was one of those old track rules.
Yes.
And everything's going great until I have the audacity to go on vacation. And that this is the week when the child gets very sick and ends up dying. And so then what happens is the family dies alone. They had a team at the hospital. They had my partner covering them. But because we had set up a system in which I was the only doctor qualified to care for them, if I'm not there, the result is they're abandoned. And so that's a really egregious result of this kind of enmeshed relationship we had set up, right?
Yes.
That family felt abandoned. Like, wouldn't it have been better if we had set up a system where we're all part of a team? Like, you always have care available to you because there's this pool of people that you receive care from, and we have a system in which one of us is always there. We don't all go on vacation at the same time, right? We've never
Right.
done that before. So that was kind of a really, when you have experiences like that clicks into your mind. Oh, I now understand why these boundaries are important. It's not just my own wounds. I'm actually wounding someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Healthcare workers are not wired to care about their own wounds. Like, never, never, never. If I say, here's how this is hurting you, they don't care. I have to tell them, here's how it's going to hurt somebody else. And then all of a sudden they'll like click in and be like, oh, okay, okay. Now I'll stop doing that thing.
Right. Wow. So, what about your coaching program called Unstuck? Tell us about that. What is it all about?
Thank you for asking. Unstuck is a program that I designed originally with academic specialists like myself in mind, but now I've sort of broadened that out to everyone in healthcare, primarily those who work in the deciding side of things. So like a physician or nurse practitioner, that type of role where you're having to make tough decisions. But primarily, Unstuck is education, support system, and coaching for people who just kind of feel sort of unsatisfied with their jobs in healthcare. And that most people who come into the program, and what I designed this for, like, don't want to quit their job. They still feel like they're called to this work. They really want to serve in that way. And so, but they have this kind of false belief that I either can just stay in the misery that I'm in or quit my job. And what we help them figure out is, no, what's the version of being a doctor, nurse practitioner, PA, dentist, whatever it is that you are? What's the version of that actually works for your life and makes you happy? And so it's ever evolving as a program, because I aim to meet people where they are and serve at the highest level. But yeah, it's all delivered online so that people can participate wherever they are. And the reason why we have entry criteria is because we do work as a group, and we want the group to feel safe and familiar, and not have people who have like a totally diverse experience that doesn't make any sense for the things that we tend to talk about.
Right.
That being said, I bring that up specifically because the work that we do is like really core, just like how to get your life sorted. I call it grounded realignment coaching, basically like bringing you home to yourself. And that is not anything that is specific to physicians. I cohort with physicians and physician adjacent because the stuff we talk about can get a little hard, and I don't want anybody to be traumatized by being in our group and hearing somebody talking about their work, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, that's great. That is so great. And do you see a transformation in a lot of your clients where they make positive changes?
Yes, yes. I think that this program, and I've patterned this program off of many different programs, but it's remarkable how fast of a transformation people can have in a short amount of time once they sort of commit to reprogramming, right? I've mentioned so many things just in my own life, and in this conversation, I'm sure you could give me hundreds more from your own life and people you've met. Those just like little changes, right? Some of it takes time. Some, like, if you're gonna sleep, if you're underslept and we got to get you sleeping, well, we got to do that for enough nights in a row that you start to feel better. But surprisingly few. After a week, you're gonna feel a whole lot different.
Absolutely.
So I have seen really remarkable results in people just from the simplest things. We put them in a container where it's safe to do it. We put you around people who are celebrating these small wins, are not going to think it's weird that you set yourself a bedtime. And then we let that stuff do its stuff, right? Just like the yoga mat worked its magic on me, even though I was kind of there reluctantly. If you show up to the program, it's going to work its magic on you. And then in terms of like big outcomes, we do help people with those more career surface looking things, and people have decided to change jobs. People have decided to pursue a different role within the organization. People have decided to cut back to part-time. So there have been kind of those more tangible outcomes. But I mean, honestly, people just say, I feel like a different person, or my husband said that I'm like a different person. Those are like the things that I'm like, whoa, it's
Yeah.
working.
So where could people join that program? Where could they find you?
You can find out everything that I have going on my website, emmajonesmd.com. Everything will be there, whether you're interested in a program, book, blog, YouTube, whatever I got going on. Start at the website homepage and you'll find it all.
Okay, and I'll put that in the show notes. But Dr. Jones, leave us with one final thought. So there's a practitioner on here listening, and everything that you're talking about is resonating with them, and they feel stuck. What would be one piece of advice that you would leave them with?
Oh my gosh, if you are stuck in the mud right now, the first thing I want you to hear is that you are not alone. Thank God you are listening to this podcast. You already got the first lifeline coming in, and just put your hand up and ask for help. Go somewhere. Going to go to my website, find a free resource. I do free discovery calls. Put your hand up and ask for help. That is the absolutely best thing that you can do. We want to know the whole roadmap, and you do not need to know the whole roadmap. You just need to know the next step, and that is often just asking for help. You already did the right step by listening to this podcast, but the next right step is to seek a little bit more individual attention, because you are absolutely not alone. There's so many people out there that have experienced the same thing or some version of the thing, and there's people like me and you, Susan, that are creating safe spaces for people to put that truth out and figure out a plan forward.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, for my listeners, I'll put all of Dr. Jones's information in the show notes where you could find her and reach out. And Dr. Jones, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you giving me your time, and I appreciate what you do. You're so valued in this community of healthcare workers. So, continued success to you and your family.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.